There are 3 really, really important dates that you have to know if you're selling your home. And if you miss these dates, you messed up, and there's probably it's going to hurt you one way or the other. So these dates are super important for you to keep an eye on and for you to put in your calendar and never forget that they are coming up. My name is Jamin Goecker. I'm a realtor in South Central Alaska, and my mission is to help you to build an intentional and a significant legacy for yourself and your family by coaching you in real estate. And today I'm going to be answering a question that I kind of have to explain to people. And it's one of those things where you just don't know that you don't know until someone explains it to you. And that is the 3 most important dates that you have to keep an eye on as you're getting your property sold and as you're under contract. So we'll be jumping into that in just a minute. But for those of you who haven't done so already, do make sure you like this video, do subscribe. And without further ado, let's go and jump into today's video. So first thing that I do want to point out is that these dates that we're going to be going through are negotiated ahead of time before we have an agreement with the purchase and sale agreement. The purchase and sale agreement is going to be the offer that the buyer makes to us initially, and then we sit down and we figure out like if the dates for these specific steps of the process are going to really make sense and are really going to work for you as the seller. Because sometimes one of these dates needs to be moved around because you've got some special stuff going on. The very first date that is super, super important for you to know about as the seller is going to be the end of the due diligence period. So the end of the due diligence period says that by this date, buyer and seller will have an agreement on repairs to the property. Okay. At the end of this period, the buyer either has to walk away and keep their earnest money, or we have an agreement and we move forward. If there's going to be a date by which the transaction falls apart, it's going to be by this date, because like I said, the odds of the buyer losing their earnest money pretty high once they've gone past that end of that due diligence period. So end of the due diligence period is going to be the biggest, arguably the biggest, most important date in the transaction, at least for managing the transaction anyway. Because if it's going to fall apart, it's probably going to be by then. The second most important date that you need to keep an eye on as a seller and that you need to give special attention to is going to be the date by which we order the appraisal and the date by which we forward funds for it. Now, it's not written in stone who has to advance funds for the appraisal or when we advance funds for it, because here's the thing, appraisals right now are taking about 2 weeks to a month sometimes to get turned back and for it to come back to us. So that unfortunately is just a fact of life right now. And the date that the appraisal gets forwarded the funds for, we get on the docket for that to start working, is going to be important, because most buyers are going to prefer to advance funds for the appraisal after the due diligence period is over, because then they're not out $700 to $900 on the appraisal fee if the deal doesn't come together in the due diligence period. So they have way less skin in the game if they do it after the due diligence period though. If we have a short timeline though, and we're trying to get closed quickly, then the best thing you can do is to have the appraisal ordered, like we're under contract on Monday and we have the appraisal ordered by Monday or Tuesday, because then that starts that process. And so we're not at the finish line still waiting around for the appraisal for that to come back. So the date for the appraisal in which it gets ordered is important, and it's not necessarily written in stone who advances funds for it and when exactly it's going to have the funds advanced for it. So it really just depends on the situation that we're in and how long of an escrow period that we're looking at, and how confident the buyer is that they are going to want the property. If it's something that's almost brand new, then the chances are they're not going to find anything huge in the due diligence period. So there's a chance that they're going to be willing to advance funds for it at the start of the transaction as opposed to at the end of the due diligence period. So that's going to be the second wildly important date you have to keep track of if you are the seller. Let's take a break here real quick. So for those of you who've been watching for a little bit, you know that I have a seller guide for those of you who are considering getting your property on the market in the near future. So if that's something that that would interest you and you'd like to check it out, then certainly feel free to go to my website down below in the description section and put seller guide in the comment section when you're registering to the website. And I'll make sure to go ahead and send that over to you to be of assistance to you as you're trying to decide what your next steps are. Now, let's go and finish today's video talking about the third wildly important goal you have to be aware of as a seller, and that is the recording date. So the recording date is usually the next business day after the signing and after the closing, because up here in Alaska, you don't go to the closing table, sign all the paperwork, they give you the keys, and you move into your new home that day. That's not how it works. If you bought a house up here before, you know it's not. But the recording date is the date where all those documents from closing get sent over to the governing body that be, and becomes recorded with the state and becomes a public record. Goes to the borough or the municipality or whatever governing area that you're in. Once that becomes a part of the official record, then at that point, the ownership for the property will go to the buyer. So this is really important, because if you are scheduling utilities to be switched over, or you're scheduling all of the, you're scheduling movers and all that, you've got to know, you've got to have that date, like drop, that's your drop dead date. You've got to get your stuff out of there. Anything left in the home after that point, personal items, technically becomes the ownership of the new buyer. So that's a really big point for those people who might have lots of stuff or might take a while to move. Unless you have something in writing saying specifically this item can be picked up by this time after closing, then you're going to be really putting yourself into a bind. So I've seen a couple instances of this kind of shaking out. Number one, I was representing the buyers. We did our final walkthrough. We're going to be closing the next day, and literally they still had all their furniture and everything was still in there. And we are closing the next day and recording the day after that. And the other broker was there walking through with me, and I was pretty steamed. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty upset. And the reason for that is it was already a cantankerous transaction the entire way, and now the seller cannot figure out how to get their stuff out of there. And the broker was like, oh yeah, they said they'll have some people, they'll come over and slowly start getting everything out of here. And I know what the purchase and sale agreement says, and I know if there's all these personal items are still on the property, it legally becomes the ownership of the new people. So I was talking with a broker and going through and going, okay, well, I want you to tell the seller that tomorrow this stuff is still here. At the time of recording, we're gonna have a big sale, and I bet I can get $200 out of that brand new couch over there. You know what? I'm feeling generous. I'll give the TV to somebody for $100. My buyers are just gonna make a big yard sale out of all the seller's personal possessions here. So not surprisingly, they got very motivated very quickly to get all their stuff out of there. So let's try to avoid that. Now, had another instance with this where I was representing the seller, and they had like a little shed that was out there. It was the winter time. Clearly in the bill of sale, it said this shed is not going to be going with the property, but we just had an agreement written out ahead of time just saying, hey, seller to remove the shed by this date after recording. So it's in writing. It says we're going to go ahead and do that. That is a situation, or that's a scenario in which the stuff being on the property, even after recording, can be okay as long as you have it in writing, both on the bill of sale and in writing, like in an amendment to the contract saying, hey, this stuff is going to be removed after the fact. Once you do that, then okay, I can see that. But the scenario in which you walk in, all their stuff is there, is not acceptable. Okay, if your stuff is still all there, you think you're just going to slowly move it afterwards, that's not acceptable, and you're going to end up paying a price for that. Hopefully not the scenario where I was seriously about to just yard sale all of somebody's personal possessions off, just because I was in a pretty pissy mood. And also, that's messed up. Pay attention, for crying out loud. So these are going to be your three big dates that you need to keep an eye on as a seller. There's obviously a lot of other dates that are important. These are just the ones that kind of float to the top. If you have any other questions, do reach out to me in the description section down below on either Facebook, Instagram, or my website, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions there as well. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.